The gaming industry made $62.8 billion this year. That's an all-time record. That's the kind of number that gets printed on earnings reports and projected onto screens at shareholder meetings while executives shake hands and pat each other on the back for another year of unprecedented growth. $62.8 billion. Line goes up. Everybody's happy. Except you're not happy, are you? Because here's what that number doesn't tell you. While the industry was busy minting its latest fortune, 38% of you stopped buying games at launch, not 38% of some abstract demographic. 38% of you, the people watching this video right now, the people who built this industry with your wallets and your time and your loyalty over decades of showing up on day one, you stopped. And nobody in a boardroom anywhere is losing sleep over it because they don't need you anymore. They replaced you. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how they did it, who they replaced you with, and why that $80 game sitting on your digital storefront isn't a pricing decision. It's a ransom note from a war you didn't even know was being fought. A war over silicon. A war over memory chips. A war where AI data centers are outbidding the entire gaming hardware supply chain, and the collateral damage is your ability to afford a console 2 years from now. That's not speculation. That's the data. And I'm going to show you all of it. Let's start with the lie, because that's what the $62.8 billion number really is. It's not technically false. The money's real. The revenue's real. Consumer spending on video games in the US hit about $60.7 billion in 2025, up roughly 1.5% year over year, and Circana's projecting another 3.4% climb this year to hit that record number. On the surface, this looks like a thriving industry. Steady growth. Consistent spending. A mature market doing exactly what a mature market's supposed to do. But that's just the paper trail. The reality on the ground is much darker. Because underneath that calm surface is what Mat Piscatella, one of the most respected analysts in the gaming space, describes as tremendous churn. Not a little churn. Not your normal market fluctuation. Tremendous churn. The kind that means the total number of gamers in the US has hit a hard ceiling. We're not adding new players. The audience isn't growing. Everyone who was going to pick up a controller has already picked one up. And while the player count's flatlined, the number of games coming out every year keeps climbing. More products chasing the same pool of people and the same pool of dollars, and hovering above all of it like black holes are the games that never let go. Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, GTA Online. These aren't just popular games, they're gravity wells. They pull in player time, player spending, player social lives, and the percentage of people logging into them every month is inching upward, while the hours spent inside them keep growing. Every minute someone spends in Fortnite is a minute they're not spending on your new $40 game, or your $70 AAA release, or your passion project that took 4 years to build. The numbers show a record year, but look closer and you'll see the eviction notice. The industry isn't growing. It's concentrating. A handful of massive games and a small group of wealthy consumers are propping up the entire structure while everything underneath slowly caves in. And that brings us to the split, the fracture that Piscatella calls the K-shaped economy. Picture the letter K, two arms extending from the same point but going in completely opposite directions. One arm up, one arm down. That's the gaming market right now, and if you're watching this video, I can almost guarantee which arm you're on. On the upper arm, you've got what the industry's quietly calling the affluent gamer. Generally older. Generally wealthier. The person who drops $100 on a premium edition without thinking twice, who subscribes to Game Pass and PS Plus and still buys games on top of all that, who sees a collector's edition with a statue and a steelbook and doesn't even flinch. Price doesn't matter to this person. If they want something, they buy it. End of story. And this is a small slice of the total gaming audience, but their spending power is massive. And here's the part that should make your stomach turn. The entire industry is pivoting to serve them. They're calling it affluent gaming. I call it the end of the middle class. Because on the lower arm of that K, you've got everyone else. The person who sees $70 and goes, yeah, I'll wait. The person who's quietly defaulted to free-to-play, not because they prefer it, but because it's what they can actually afford. The person for whom a $30 monthly Game Pass subscription feels like a stretch, even though the math technically works out. 34% of consumers now say they exclusively wait for sales. 38% have stopped buying at launch entirely. That's not some niche behavior. That's a third of the market engaging in what I'm calling the quiet rebellion. These people haven't abandoned gaming. They've abandoned the pricing structure. They've looked at the system and decided rationally and correctly that paying full price on day one is a losing bet. The game's going to be cheaper in 3 months. It'll show up on a subscription service in 6. There'll be a complete edition with all the DLC for the original base price within a year. Every signal the market sends says, wait. And people are finally listening. But here's the thing. The industry doesn't care that you're waiting. And this is where the fracture gets really ugly, because Piscatella said something during his interview that I think needs to be repeated until everybody hears it. He said the industry's no longer trying to drive organic audience growth. The game now is revenue per user. Getting each existing player to spend more. Not finding new players. Not expanding the market. Squeezing more money out of the people who are already inside it. And if you can't be squeezed, if you're part of that 34% waiting for sales, if you're in the 38% who won't buy at launch, then you're not the target anymore. You've been deprioritized. Not abandoned exactly. They'll still take your $15 when the game goes on sale in November, but you're not who they're building for anymore. The $100 premium editions, the $20 skins, the $15 battle passes, the subscription tiers that keep getting more expensive every single year, all of it's calibrated for the upper arm of the K, the affluent gamer, the whale. While the industry celebrates its billions, the average player is being quietly ghosted. And the worst part is most people don't even realize it's happening because the free-to-play stuff is still there. Fortnite's still free. Roblox is still free. You can still play games. You just can't play the ones being made for someone with a bigger wallet than yours. Now, everything I've told you so far is uncomfortable, but this is where it gets genuinely scary. Because there's a crisis unfolding right now that most gamers are only vaguely aware of, and it's going to reshape who gets to play games, how they play them, and whether the device you're holding right now will even have a successor. This isn't a supply chain error. It's a strategic withdrawal. The AI boom has created an unprecedented global demand for high bandwidth memory, DDR5, HBM chips, the same exact components that go into gaming consoles and high-end PCs. Companies like Nvidia, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta are building AI data centers at a pace that's eating the global supply of these components faster than manufacturers can keep up. And when a hyperscale data center and Sony are both bidding for the same batch of memory chips and the data center's willing to pay a premium that Sony can't match at a consumer-friendly price point, the data center wins. Every single time. That's why 64 gig DDR5 kits have hit $750 and climbing. That's why the Steam Deck's out of stock. That's why Valve's Steam machine has gone completely quiet after what was supposed to be a landmark announcement. That's why the Asus ROG Ally got what amounts to a $200 price hike in Japan. And that, right there, is the real reason Bloomberg reported that the PS6 might be pushed back to 2028 or possibly 2029. Not because Sony doesn't have the talent. Not because the design isn't ready. Because they literally can't get the components at a price that makes a consumer console work. Piscatella was blunt about this. He said this is what's keeping him up at night. He said nobody really has their heads around it. He said some CEOs are talking about this lasting until 2030 and maybe longer. And then he said something that I think should be a 5-alarm fire for every single person who plays games. He said, what you know today, you don't know for tomorrow. There's no ability to count on what happens next. That's a guy with 20 years in this industry saying he can't see the road ahead. That's not caution. That's a warning. And the dominoes are already falling. If consoles become hard to find or jump past $1,000, which we're talking about as a real possibility for next-gen hardware, then everything else in the ecosystem shifts. That $30 Game Pass sub suddenly doesn't feel so expensive when the alternative is dropping $1,200 on a console. Cloud gaming goes from being a neat little feature to being the only way a normal person can play new titles. And who's best set up for that world? Microsoft. They've got Azure, they've got the cloud infrastructure already built and running, they've got Game Pass designed from the ground up as a subscription delivery system, Sony's next with PS Plus cloud streaming, and Nintendo's way behind because their entire business depends on you buying a dedicated piece of hardware that you can actually afford. Piscatella called this out directly. He described the most cynical reading of the situation as one where computing power is being pulled away from consumers who could own it and funneled into a model where you're forced to rent it instead. And then he said something that stuck with me long after I finished watching. He said, if you look at what's happening, it makes a little bit of sense. Let that land for a second. An industry analyst with 2 decades of experience is telling you plainly that the shift from owning to renting your gaming isn't some tinfoil hat theory. It's a reasonable reading of what's actually happening in the market right now. You might not own your next gaming device. You might rent time on it through a monthly fee. And the RAM shortage isn't some accident in that equation. For some of the companies involved, it might be the whole point. So let's bring this back to you, because the data points and the silicon wars and the corporate strategy are all important, but they're just abstractions until you connect them to what's actually happening in your daily life as someone who plays games. You're part of a market that's been sliced in half. The upper half's being courted with premium products and exclusive tiers and $100 bundles. The lower half's being pushed toward free-to-play and subscriptions that cost more every year. And the middle, that space where a $40 game could find an audience, where a mid-budget studio could take a creative swing and survive on decent launch sales, that middle's getting crushed. Not by consumer apathy. By structural economics. When 34% of the market won't buy at launch, the games that depend on launch window revenue to keep the lights on are the first to go. And those aren't the Fortnites and the GTAs. Those games have marketing budgets bigger than the GDP of small countries. The casualties are the mid-tier titles. The AA games, the $20 to $50 million projects that don't have a battle pass or a live service tail or a billion-dollar publisher propping them up. These games need you to show up in the first 6 months, and a third of you have said no. Not because the games aren't worth it, but because the entire economic landscape has trained you to wait. The industry created the patient gamer, and now the patient gamer is starving the ecosystem of the money it needs to support anything that isn't already huge. Piscatella brought up a game called Goodnight Universe, said it was one of the best games made last year, and not a single person he talked to had ever heard of it. Didn't show up on anybody else's top 10 list. It was just invisible. Buried under storefront algorithms that push the same 10 live service games to the front page every single week. He pointed out that on PlayStation and Xbox, the homepage is always Fortnite, always Call of Duty, always Game Pass. He said the Xbox store took over 8 clicks to get to an indie sale. 8 clicks. The system that's supposed to connect you with new games is actively burying anything that isn't already dominant. So you've got consumers who won't buy at launch on one side and a discovery system that won't show them anything new on the other. The middle-class game is getting strangled from both directions, and when the middle dies, all you're left with are the extremes. Free-to-play over here. Blockbuster luxury products over there. Everything in between goes dark. And then there's the bunker. Because that's what the subscription boom actually is when you strip away the marketing spin. That 20% spike in subscription spending isn't people celebrating some amazing new model. It's a retreat. When individual games cost $70 to $100, when you can't trust they'll even work on day one, when you know the price is going to crater within a few months, the subscription becomes a shelter, not a preference. A financial survival calculation born out of a market that's made every other option feel like a trap. And the platforms know you're stuck. That's why they keep jacking up the price. Microsoft didn't hike Game Pass to $30 because they thought you'd be thrilled about it. They did it because they know you've got nowhere else to go. Buy games individually at full price. Most people can't justify that anymore. Go free to play only. Then you're stuck with whatever Fortnite and Roblox are offering. The subscription sits between those options like an uncomfortable compromise that costs more every year but still feels slightly less terrible than the alternatives. And when the hardware crisis gets worse, when consoles hit $1,000 or more, when you can't buy a Steam Deck because Valve can't source the chips, the subscription isn't just the best deal anymore. It's the only deal. Cloud gaming becomes the default, not because it's better, but because ownership's been priced out of your reach. That's where all of this is heading, not because somebody sat in a room and drew up some grand conspiracy, but because every individual incentive in the system, from AI companies gobbling up memory chips, to publishers chasing revenue per user, to platform holders cranking subscription prices, Every single one of those incentives points in the same direction, away from ownership, away from affordability, away from you. Which brings us to the last piece, Grand Theft Auto 6. The most anticipated game in the history of this medium and the single biggest load-bearing wall in Circana's entire 2026 forecast. That 3.4% growth to $62.8 billion, GTA 6 is shouldering a massive chunk of that number. Piscatella called it extremely needed for the console space. It's the game that's supposed to convince people to invest in current-gen systems. It's the game that's supposed to boost subscriptions, move accessories, drive engagement, and prove to the investor class that the traditional models still got a heartbeat. And honestly, it probably will, at least on paper. GTA 6 is going to be the biggest entertainment launch in human history. It's going to shatter records, it's going to dominate every chart, every metric, every conversation. But here's the question that won't leave me alone. If Grand Theft Auto 6, a once-in-a-generation cultural event backed by the most successful entertainment franchise ever created, if that game drops into a market where 38% of consumers still won't buy at launch, then the strike was never about individual games. It was always about the system. GTA 6 is going to be the exception for millions of people. It'll be the one game they break their rule for, but the rule's going to survive. After the launch, dust settles and the hype dies down and the discourse moves on to the next thing, that 38% is still going to be there. Probably bigger. Because one game, no matter how massive, can't fix a structural crack. And if the biggest year in gaming history only happens because of a single title, that's not proof of a healthy industry. That's proof of an industry standing on one leg. So here's what's really going on underneath that $62.8 billion headline. Gaming's not dying, but it's splitting apart. It's becoming two completely separate industries that happen to share a name and nothing else. On one side, you've got luxury gaming, expensive hardware, premium subs, enthusiast devices, a smaller but wealthier audience being served by an ecosystem built to pull maximum dollars out of every person in it. On the other side, you've got free-to-play, mobile, Roblox, Fortnite, accessible, monetized through sheer volume and microtransactions, and increasingly where the actual majority of human beings play games, not always because they want to, but because the economic gravity of this market has pushed them out of everything else. And in between those two worlds, where the $40 game used to live, where mid-budget studios used to take swings, where the average person used to feel like this whole thing was built for them, there's a growing emptiness. A void where something important used to be. $62.8 billion, record revenue, record spending. And somehow, for most of the people watching this right now, gaming's never felt less affordable, less welcoming, and less like it belongs to you. That's the Mirage. The numbers look incredible. The foundation underneath is cracking. And the question I want to leave you with is simple. Are you part of the 38%? Are you in the launch strike? Have you quietly stopped paying full price because this market taught you not to? And if you have, is GTA 6 the one exception you're willing to make? Or have you stopped making exceptions altogether? Drop it in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.